Hi, my name is Michael Hampton. Have you ever wondered why so many figures don't have clothes on? In this introductory lesson, we'll be describing and looking at some of the major concerns around drapery. It's really easy, in my opinion, to get caught up in the minutia of folds, all the small wrinkles, the small bends, infinitely lost in the detail of those areas. Really, drapery is a way of communicating. It's not just about the detailed rendering of things. And in this course, I'm really encouraging you to analyze, to look at things for their intention, for their meaning, very much like the gesture drawing course, where the goal was to understand the figure in a way that allowed us to project and intuit a story from the body. The first thing that's, of course, very important is that I have some kind of mannequin for my figure. I'll be using something that is a little bit different from my more heavily constructed figures, the ones that I would typically use for an anatomy drawing. The reason I would use a more simplified mannequin or shape-based mannequin, like I'm quickly laying down here, is because I want to be able to access the silhouette of the figure more directly. So something like this, you could even imagine it as like the mannequin you would find in a store or like a clothing store. Something that allows me a quicker access, say, to shape, allows me to directly think about the way that shape changes, right? When we look at the trajectory of style. I'm fascinated with American illustration from 1890s to the 1960s or 70s. So many of my classmates and professional artists that I love just look at Charles Dana Gibson or J.C. Leyendecker and they emulate the style. And then that's it. But no thought or consideration to why? Why did Gibson make these looks? Why did Leyendecker design the arrow collar man the way that he did? There's all these kind of deep and rich cultural qualities that will be really useful for anybody that might want to design characters and inject into their character a quality of reality. And if I can look at a figure or have a way of establishing a figure as a series of shapes like I have here, I can directly move and change and distort these shapes. So some examples. I thought it really bizarre and confused that in Renaissance portraiture, people always had giant dog collars. Maybe you've seen this in early paintings. This was something that just prevented people from having to launder their clothes often. But then that changes when we look at the use of it in the upper classes, which is also another register of interest for me. Why would you need a jeweled, highly ornate bib around your neck constantly? You're flaunting the absence of labor. So things like that really interest me. I'm thinking about the figure in a slightly different way, with a more pulled back kind of zoom to it. Why invest in the development of the planes of the pelvis or the tibia if that ultimately isn't going to be something I use? This kind of mannequin here will give me enough of an understanding of the circumference or the space of the legs to start to develop the idea of a waist. But let's kind of first map out the whole idea of where things are, and then we will build a little bit more as we get our footing here.
This is the first lesson in Michael Hampton's new drapery course.
Yay!
In this course, Hampton teaches you how to simplify all that chaotic mess that drapery can have into a system that will help you understand every fold. You'll learn the basics of drapery up through ways to stylize and push your storytelling. Check it out at proko.com/drapery. The summer sale is almost over, so get it now for that sweet 20% discount. And submit your assignments while the course is live to get a chance to be in the video critiques.
Very often in terms of gesture drawing or kind of thinking about drapery quickly, sometimes what I'll do for my map is kind of create a silhouette for the whole. The reason I like, again, to look at something simple and more 2D is to exhibit or to look at change. So the Gibson girl would sit historically in contrast to the flapper, which is a totally different shape, look, design, and between these two things, I can start to learn a lot about what culture is doing. What is the motivation to see a body, to use fabric to accentuate a body to look like this versus this? And why are they only separated by one generation, right? That to me is storytelling, right? That would be the storytelling that I would want to understand from drapery, right? If I'm using this as my template or my understructure, all I'm really thinking about doing is expanding or constricting areas. So what is normal in female dress is a restricted waist. So I can kind of pull that shape in these areas to start to understand the way that drapery and costume is impacting the body and making a statement. You could start to look at this and incorporate some shape language too. Here we would have the more modernist geometry of the skyscraper for the newly independent flapper. And then we revert again to the first kind of appearance of the pinup in the petty girl, the full figure or rhythmic, sensual curves of the Gibson girl, but of course a little less covered. And then after that we have the boxy geometry of Rosie the Riveter, right, who is kind of the flapper but hyper masculine, based off a Michelangelo painting of Isaiah. Right, so it looks, something like that. Then we're back to the curved housewife again, right? And it's kind of fuller and rhythmic, so that we have the woman as this kind of center for the home that is allowing us to demonstrate all of our great products that we can sell post-war. This is what fascinates me about the storytelling component of drapery, is the way that the shape language can change with regularity. So this would be my first broad explanation for the use of a simple mannequin. And then why? What I would do with something that's very simple in terms of shape to analyze from a distance. The reason for the distance is I see too many people look at drapery, so maybe like to take that area, and then hyperfixate on every single wrinkle, edge, change, right? And then they go inside, right? And then every single area. And then by the time you've done that, it doesn't look like anything at all. It's probably a fault on some sense, but I'm very rarely trying to draw what I see. I'm always pulling ideas and creating some kind of analytical equivalent. My goal is to understand what I see, and with that understanding, bring some design to it. So instead, what I'll be doing is, once I get past my map, I'll be talking about 7 folds total. So throughout the class and the lectures, we're really looking at 7 ways that drapery can telegraph what the body is doing underneath. The 7 folds that I'm going to be looking at, so we could just start to number them here, are always going to be in an effort to understand the way that the body underneath is activating that fabric. But the ones that I find to be interesting, or I'll use often, will be pipe fold. I'll use a diaper fold. Let's just go with half lock here. We'll be talking about spiral folds, flag folds, and then Z or compression folds. The 7th, and the reason that the 7th I'm going to put down there on its own, is that it's in trouble. It's an inert fold. And so I try to be very careful with inert folds. These first 6 are all active. So those are forms or folds that create a feeling of connection and movement of the body underneath. Inert folds, while they aren't the devil, right, are difficult sometimes to work with. So I want to separate these because they would be without response. Right? So maybe an inert fold would be, you take your shirt off at the end of the day and just toss it on your bed, right? So that would be an example of fabric that's, what is it describing? There's a lot of little wrinkles and bends and, walls and ledges to it that are really intricate, ornate, and interesting. But what is the story of that, right? So it's hard. And so I always just try to keep that as something separate. As far as the different folds here, that's a pretty limited number. And if you look at other books or text on drapery, like, for example, Dynamic Drapery by Hogarth, there's a lot more in terms of the description, right? There's added folds and ideas. And then you can also see some variation in the names of these folds. But what I'll use the basic 6 for is something that's more limited, and then I'll look for more elaborate folds that don't seem to kind of fall into these perfectly. Those can be unholy baby combinations of these. So these can get together, create unholy bastard children folds, and then have a bit more complexity. But if you keep these 6 in mind, you can always unravel them. Once we get past this stage, I'm going to start to explore the inside based on the perspective of the body where it's exhibited and shown through the 7 basic folds. The way that I connect my folds to the figure will be by what are called, we can use landmarks, which is something that you might remember from your study of perspective or figure construction. Think of landmarks as it relates to your skeleton. So now just think of your skeleton as like one kind of interesting wire hanger, right? Like a wire hanger you'd have in your closet to put a shirt on. Just think of landmarks like that now. There are these areas of, subtle resistance that drapery can be seen to cling to, be pushed on, grab, and they're going to set up, or landmarks are going to set you up to understand the 7 basic or 6 basic folds. by what we'll call areas of tension, or so books will refer to this differently. Hogarth calls them anchor or tension points. So just think that the landmark points of your body, your skeleton, or even areas that are protruding, they don't have to just be bone, become anchor areas or tension areas that drapery responds to. So I'm trying to understand the skeleton. I don't really want to learn anything new, right? To just study drapery. I want to keep the same kind of basic foundational understanding of the body, not have to invent a bunch of new stuff just to draw drapery. So if I can still learn and remember where my landmark points are, these are a good way to begin to understand how drapery is going to react. These areas are going to start to give me a way in to discuss and understand those smaller folds and how they react. Second to that, you could think of what else would create a tension or an area of tension in a drape. It could also be a seam, right? It could be the seam of your shoulder or the seam in a pant. So it could be the garment itself, the dress, the shirt. So you have one register or level that would be the way the body impacts drapery, and then you'd have the garment itself. And then the last thing that I think about quite a bit that isn't at play so much in regular figure construction and drawing would be gravity. Right? So gravity is also a really profound and important gesture to most of what we're seeing with drapery. So everything kind of goes with gravity's gesture, which would be straight down. That as a force creates different areas of pull. Like if we look at the idea of the shirt on the wire hanger, everything from that wire hanger drops down and creates its own type of gesture from there. So that would be something else that I want to be really careful to understand when we get to the folds and how they're operating, is the way they connect to the body through landmarks. Those reinterpreted as anchor or tension points will set up my understanding of folds. And then from there, we'd have gravity. The way that we'll understand each of these will be very much like how I study anatomy. So I'm going to look at each one of these folds so that you can understand and place it on top of your mannequin with a few steps that I hope will be easy to follow and give you some way of interpreting their complexity. So each fold for me starts as a shape. Each shape can have a gesture. This would be your way of kind of understanding the behavior or kind of the test case of each fold when it's isolated. And then the third thing is that each fold can have its own perspective, right? We can add something to the body based on the make of the fabric, right? And not all fabric is the same. So, something that's sheer and satin is going to contribute a perspective to the body different than something that's denim. There's all these variables. So I like to keep this simple workflow so that I can say, well, let's take the example of a diaper fold. Maybe a diaper fold as a shape is born of two tension points, right? And here's those tension points. And then the effect of the diaper fold from those two tension points might look like this. So that's a shape. But what if these tension points, what if I know that this is formulaically going to appear on the body between two areas of tension that can move? Well, I want to have the capacity to bring some storytelling to that. So shape could change. What if my tension points get closer? So maybe my diaper fold would end up looking like this. So that would be the difference between a neutral and then maybe a contracted shape. Same fold, right? But by using a system like this or something that's breaking down the qualities of each piece of drapery, I'm able to explore more variety inside. Or maybe I have the tension points get much further. So for this one, I always think of that scene in Snow White where you're probably too young to remember that, and they could fly closer or further. My bird's a little overweight. So these birds have diabetes, but they're still effective at pulling the cape, the gesture of the diaper fold in and out. So that's something to keep in mind of tension points. I know that we're describing them as part of the skeleton, but they do have the capacity to move and change and reorganize. And in that process, we need something that we can use or lean on in order to observe the different types of qualities or shapes that can make. This would be gesture. And then perspective is ultimately, what does it go on, right? So the last part would be if this is a cape and going around, Snow White's back, I need to eventually settle that to go with the forms underneath. And this would be the benefit of having that neutral mannequin, is I just want enough underlying surface there to be able to bring some basic idea or understanding of the space underneath to that piece of fabric. The whole thing here is wrapping and or overlapping. So we're going to talk about two specific ways to convince the eye that there's surface, right? Just by wrapping that to the mannequin and then putting something behind something else. This course will give you the foundation for having a mannequin figure that gives you enough perspective so that you can move into designing folds and fabric on top. I want to share ideas with you related to fabric that allow you to understand it as a system so that you can have an analytical approach, a way to see what's there, understand it, and then pick and choose how you want to reference so that you don't lose the figure underneath to some kind of wealth of detail, or waste your time designing folds that don't contribute to the overall idea of the figure. And then two, I want to introduce you to fabric and costume in a way that allows you to think about what it means more as a total and silhouette. If you're interested in studying drapery and folds and a little bit of costume with me, you can check out the course at proko.com/drapery.